What's up, y'all? My name is Shane. I'm a producer here at 5 News. I know, don't let that throw you off. But there's some things I've been wanting to talk to y'all about. And no, it's not about the news, but it is about the music scene in our area. Come on, y'all.
The music scene, you ask? Yes, the music scene. That's because it's not getting the recognition and respect it deserves. That's right, I said it. How do I know?
Because I've been playing music for over 30 years and I know how much talent there is across the state. In fact, did you know that there are over 30 famous artists that come from the state of Arkansas?
From Ronnie Hawkins and Charlie Rich to Conway Twitty and Black Oak, Arkansas, the Natural State has a rich history of great artists. So, I thought it would be a good idea to document the music scene in our area.
Actually, I'm not the only one that thinks it's important. You see this guy? His name is Joel. He's the chief photog here at the station, and he, like myself, is a fellow musician, has been covering the news in this area well over 20 years. This cat, he knows some people.
And that's why I want you to join us as we shine the spotlight on what we like to call Five Country. Tonight, we shine the spotlight on the Cate Brothers.
Earl and Ernie Cate, together known as the legendary Cate Brothers. I use the word legendary because, well, they are. They're local legends for sure, but they're also legendary across the state. But let's go further. I know for a fact they're recognized regionally as legends. All of this will be explained. But you know what? There was a time where they were even recognized nationally and internationally. And guess what? They're from right here in Northwest Arkansas.
Let's start where we always start, the beginning. Earl and Ernie were born actually in Marshall, Arkansas back in 1942, but the family laid stakes in Fayetteville. When I asked, what I always ask musicians because the answer varies, if their family had any musical background, they said not really, but their dad liked to try to pick around on the banjo and blow a few tunes on the harmonica. But they said their dad encouraged them to play, and they say they definitely had the itch to play. And it was at the age of around 12 when the brothers got their first instrument, a guitar, given to them by their dad.
Oh, my dad bought us I think he traded a walnut log for a guitar that had 2 strings on it. I think we were like 12, or I can't remember for sure. And we started thumping on it. Even more we played, and he realized, hey, I think they want to play, you know. And he would take us to square dances. A couple of Baker Brothers, they were called, that played for the square dance, and fiddle and guitar, and they would sit in with them while they square dancing.
That's awesome.
We're about 12 or 13.
And that was just the beginning. They, like many musicians, had no formal training. They said they would just mimic and learn from the people around them and that influenced them, which were artists like the Everly Brothers and Chuck Berry. In fact, they used to cover a lot of the Everly Brothers when they were in high school, getting started on the scene. Back then, known as the Del Reys.
Started out the Everly Brothers, I think. Yeah, in high school, the Everly Brothers, it was the deal. Of course, we had Chuck Berry and, you know, rock and roll stuff. They were the big, because we used to do all their songs, the Everly songs.
You used to cover them and stuff?
Yeah. We do high school, we do, you know, shows.
And of course, during that same time, Earl says Ronnie Hawkins was a big influence on them as well. Don't know who Ronnie Hawkins is? He's one of the artists I mentioned in the intro of this segment. There was a reason for that. You see, Ronnie Hawkins was part of, well, wait, let's just let Earl explain it.
Locally, Ronnie Hawkins was, you know, he was, when we were still in high school, he was hitting it pretty hard.
Right.
Of course, he was in Canada most of the time, but
okay.
He bought into the Rockwood Club,
And that was here?
It was here. And the band actually originated as the band here in Fayetteville, more or less.
Right, okay, and they were called the Hawks, correct?
Exactly.
And then formed into the band.
Yeah.
All right, let's slow it down. This is exciting. So during that conversation, I asked, when did the Hawks go from what we all know as the band? And Earl said, about 1964. Okay, so let's go back. And keep in mind, I'm summing this all up as to circle back around to my point, the Cate Brothers. There's a lot of history, especially with the Rockwood, that I'm just not going to cover because it'll get us off track. Too late. Ronnie Hawkins is a rock and roll singer based out of Canada. Calling Canada his home, according to a Rolling Stone article, and his promised land in a quote from Encyclopedia of Arkansas. But Hawkins was originally from Arkansas. And according to the Encyclopedia of Arkansas and a guy named Randy Stratton,
who you'll meet later. Hawkins graduated from Fayetteville High School, studied at the U of A for a while, and pretty much did his own thing musically for several years before finally forming the Hawks. Keep in mind, Hawkins had met another Arkansas native by the name of Levon Helm years earlier, who would play drums for the Hawks.
Fast forward to the late 1950s, when the Hawks were in Canada, they met an artist named Robbie Robertson. Jump to 1960. Robertson joined up with Hawkins and Helm back in Arkansas to play guitar in the Hawks until around 1964, when the Hawks split up to pursue other routes. And it was at that time Levon Helm and Robbie Robertson, along with a few others, went on to form the band. And it's during that time that Earl and Ernie are referring to, between 57 and 64, that as the Cate Brothers were finding their own sound as the Del Reys, they would come here to the Rockwood, the place that Hawkins co-owned and operated. And they would pull through here in their car and just listen to Ronnie Hawkins and them play. In fact, they would even peek through here where a fan used to be to watch. And on the other side, the Hawks would either be rehearsing or playing a show right here. You had Ronnie Hawkins, Levon Helm, and Robbie Robertson all here jamming. It's so awesome.
Yeah, we used to go down the Rockwood and listen to them from outside because we weren't old enough to get in, but they had a big influence on us. But a few times we were going inside in the afternoon when they were rehearsing, because Ronnie always liked us, and he'd come hear us sing every stuff.
And their friend Levon Helm would support them as well.
So then when they come to town, Levon always, we met him at the Rockwood and all that, but became friends. And in fact, his nephew, Terry, who we just lost back in February, he played a few gigs with us after Dylan. He got tired of riding the plane with Dylan, because I don't know how to explain it, but anyway, the band went on and toured Europe and stuff. He came back to Arkansas, and he actually played quite a few gigs with us. And then Robbie called and said, "We got a deal with Capitol Records, they think." So he said, "I guess I better get back up to New York." He said, "My little nephew can play drums if you'll give him a chance." Levon, his parents lived there probably 4 or 5 blocks from me in Springdale. So every time Levon would come in, he would come to hear us play our shows and stuff. So that's how we developed a friendship.
We'll revisit the Rockwood shortly. Now, by the time the Hawks split up and became the band, the Cate Brothers were well on their way to finding their own sound. Indeed, they did. Because besides being influenced by the Hawks, they were also being influenced by artists like Bobby Blue Bland and Ray Charles. Ernie says they started listening to a lot of R&B. And that's where you get the sound of the Cate Brothers, a soulful, yet country/funk rock sound that Earl called blue-eyed soul.
Combination of a lot of those things, actually.
We were really influenced by the Hawks, because we were just growing up and starting to play a lot. And so
they kind of turned us on to Bobby Blue Bland, Ray Charles, and we started listening to more R&B.
And then later on in Memphis stuff, with Steve Cropper, he ended up producing a couple of albums for us.
And promoter, executive producer, and longtime friend Randy Stratton says the same thing when we were talking with him and how the label was trying to categorize their sound, that blue-eyed soul thing.
They're referring to the Everly Brothers because that's the only thing they could think of before them. They remind them so much of that. But their music was so blue-eyed soul, R&B stuff.
Yeah, I can get with that. Look, real quick, it's important to note who that man is, Randy Stratton. I didn't just bring him on randomly. Obviously, I touted him before he spoke, but there's more to it than that, right? It's important that I connect the dots for all of us.
Remember when I said Ronnie Hawkins co-owned and operated the Rockwood? Well, it was Randy's dad, Dayton Stratton, an early entertainment promoter who was the other owner-operator of the Rockwood. Hawkins and Dayton took over the Rockwood in 1960. And Dayton Stratton was, of course, good friends with Levon Helm as well, who, like Dayton, were both strong advocates for the Cate Brothers as they were coming up. And why wouldn't they be? I mean, all these folks basically came up together in music.
Now, remember what others I've talked with have said about bringing others with them? That'll all come up together shortly. The point is, Randy's dad, Dayton, was giving the Cate Brothers in their early form as the Del Reys and the Cates gang a lot of opportunity because of who Dayton was. Dayton had created a circuit.
He was not only involved in promotions in our area, but across the entire state and region, Oklahoma, Missouri, Texas, and of course even nationally, being a tour manager for the band. And remember when I said we'd revisit the Rockwood? Well, Randy says the Rockwood was the first club gig his dad let the Del Reys play at. Dayton would also go on to open and own other clubs in the area that he would feature the Del Reys at, like the Sundown Club in Norman.
Del Rey's had been playing there. When he opened that Sundown Club, he had the Del Rey's as the grand opener. That's how much my dad thought of them.
Dayton had created a circuit, and Randy, being about 11 years old at that time, grew up watching all of this and being around it. And of course, years later, becoming very much involved after losing his dad in a fatal plane crash in 1974. And now you know. Now I know.
It was during the mid-late 60s when they went from the Del Reys to the Cates Gang. And being influenced heavily by those previously mentioned, the Hawks, Bobby Blue Bland, Ray Charles, etc., the brothers figured out they were good at not just covering other people's music, but writing their own stuff.
We were mostly a cover band, you know, and then started writing more and more material, and then we got a record deal. Of course, they wanted original, you know, so that's how we ended up doing our songs. So.
Probably the late 60s is when we started putting more original stuff in our sets, and we started noticing people liked them too. It wasn't like, you know, they were dance to it.
And in fact, during that time, Ernie was actually playing guitar along with Earl. But they said that they figured out that their song sounded better with a piano and guitar.
We had an upright piano at the house, and we both of us would kind of play around on it. Eventually, he was playing guitar originally, but eventually he went to keyboard because it sounded better to have a guitar and the keyboard. You know.
And after all that, I guess you could say the Cate Brothers were born, having started as the Del Reys and evolving to the Cates Gang. By the early 1970s, their careers had started. And with support from people like Levon Helm, who was actually playing drums for them before Helm's nephew, Terry Cagle, came on board, and Randy's dad, Dayton Stratton, who helped promote, and who, of course, kept opening clubs like the Rink and the Shamrock and letting the Cates play at them, things were taking off. And as bands do when they start making a buzz, the hustle and grind to make it began. The Cate Brothers started putting in the work.
Ernie and Earl were out there hustling. I mean, the Metro Media, they went to New York, got that Metro Media deal. They were ambitious, you know. They weren't just laid back like they are. We feel like they are now. They want to make it, you know, get their stuff out there. They're proud of it. They should, of course, be.
Of course, as Ernie and Randy mentioned, they signed a record deal with Metro Media Records out of New York. They released 2 albums while with Metro Media, Wanted in 1970 and Come Back Home in 1972. Now, it's only right to pay those 2 albums honor. Every band has a foundation from which they begin, and that foundation doesn't always stay the same. It takes many forms and shapes. It's a living, breathing thing, an evolution, if you will. You know where I'm going. It's only proper to give you a quick sound check of this awesomeness, as we'll of course compare the Cates Gang with the Cate Brothers here shortly. But first, let's take a horn off their opening track from the 1970 album, Wanted. This is We All Got to Help Each Other.
We all got to help each other if we're gonna get by. We all got to help each other.
What do you think about some of that? You can hear that heavy influence from the band. You can hear that heavy influence from Ronnie Hawkins and Robbie Robertson. Absolutely fantastic. Now, fast forward 2 years later to their second album in 1972 on Metro Media, Come Back Home. Let's take a listen to the first track on that album, Living on the Countryside.
I wanna ride through fields of clover, through valleys deep and wide.
Just listen to that. Yeah, they've got that R&B, funky blue-eyed soul sound, baby. But it was 2 years later, after the release of that album, in 1974, when longtime friend and fellow musician Levon Helm took a demo of theirs out to California and left it on his agent's desk. Not long after that, they received a phone call. It was the phone call.
Levon dropped the tape with guys in L.A. We had a little demo tape, and Levon left it on the guy's desk, and he gave it to the A&R man. The A&R guy called me, said, "Who is this? Is this y'all?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "I really like this." So it ended up getting our deal. We had another deal before that with Metro Media.
Okay.
A couple albums. It was not a good deal, but yeah.
Right.
But you know.
Yeah, Levon was responsible. It was a cassette. He just left it with Elliot Roberts. We ended up going with that Lookout Management, which was, they had Joni Mitchell and a bunch of people who else, and Eagles for a while.
They signed with Elektra Asylum Records and put their first major album out in 1975, simply entitled Cate Brothers. The album was produced by legendary Memphis guitarist Steve Cropper, who also helped write the biggest single on that album, Union Man.
Well, I don't know, we always wanted to do that, get a record deal and all that, and we did. Of course, that record Steve Cropper produced and helped write the song Union Man, and it took off. You know, record company got behind it. You know, actually, was #1 in Memphis for like 6 weeks, you know, and just in Boston, #5 for several weeks.
Back then we had FM rock, and you could go to a radio station and have them play you know, song. Right? So when we were on tour, like with Queen or whatever, every city would go to the radio station. They'd play Union Man while we were there, and then if they got enough calls, they'd stay on rotation.
In rotation, it stayed on. Earl says Union Man eventually topped #4 in Boston, becoming popular in the disco clubs. Yes, I said that. But that's because Earl said that. Actually, he and Ernie both said that because it was Steve Cropper's idea to add the disco feel to that song. Union Man had actually already been written by the brothers before signing, but Cropper thought it best to add a little disco feel to it.
I mean, after all, it was 1975, baby, and disco was alive and well.
What was funny about it too is disco was starting to happen, and we didn't even know what disco was. Steve Cropper said, well, let's make this kind of a disco feel. So it ended up being a big hit in Boston at the discos. And we weren't a disco band.
Right.
Yeah. We already had the song, but it was a different feel entirely. It was more of like a bluesy Rolling Stone kind of rock and roll.
And he came in and kind
You can't put it into a dance beat.
more disco.
That's what he did.
But that's what made it a hit at that time, probably too.
Yeah, but what was funny is people would come, like we played, I can't remember where we played in Boston, at some club there, and people came to see us, but they would thought we were a black band. They were expecting black guys with blue suits on and stuff.
Really?
Yeah, they were surprised.
And we played Memphis. It was a big thing, a big crowd in Memphis, mostly a black crowd, and they had shock on their face when we walked out. It was strange, you know.
All of this based off of one song, the first single they put out on a major label. And like Earl said earlier, it was a radio world back then. The only way you were hearing new music was through the radio. And the first single people heard from the Cate Brothers was Union Man, which had that disco/funky groove to it. But hey, you decide. Here's a quick sample to listen to.
What was it like being on American Bandstand with Dick Clark?
Just like you see it. You run through it once and that's it.
He was a nice guy. Well, it was weird to have to lip sync. You know, you lip sync songs.
Oh, y'all had to lip sync?
Oh yeah,
everybody
played
did.
live.
okay.
Aretha was on the same show with us.
Dick Clark is nice. He actually knew Earl and I apart. He knew who was who, you know, when he first met him. I don't know how.
But you think about it when you were growing up, American Bandstand, well, if we ever made it there, we'd really make it. Yeah. Once you got there, it wasn't that big a deal. For some reason, I don't know why.
Well, regardless, and all joking aside, Union Man was a hit. It stayed in the top 40 on the Billboard Top 100 for 20 weeks, reaching number 24 in 1976. Oh, and I suggest watching the whole American Bandstand video. You can find it on YouTube. It's good stuff. The Cate Brothers also released their second album in 1976. It was called In One Eye and Out the Other and was also produced by Steve Cropper. Their third album, Cate Brothers Band, dropped in 1977 and was produced by Jim Mason. 2 years later, in 1979, the Cate Brothers released their fourth album, Fire on the Tracks. That album was produced by Tom Dowd. And actually, in 1979, the brothers appeared on Austin City Limits, where they played the track Time as a Thief off of Fire on the Tracks before actually releasing the album. Pretty awesome. Now, the story of how they got to Austin City Limits is pretty funny. I'll let Ernie take this one.
We're supposed to be doing it with Levon, where we were playing with him a lot. And in some reason, he got cold feet and he decided he didn't want to do it.
He didn't think it was that big a deal for some reason.
And so the guys said, well, let's let you guys do it then. So the Austin City Limits people said that, so we did it. So,
wow.
Yeah.
So he didn't think it was a big deal.
No.
So,
he thought it was some local show or something.
He's funny.
Well, I guess it is a local show, but oh, so much more, obviously. And yes, I'd recommend watching that entire show as well. You can see it on YouTube, of course. And that's Terry Cagle, Levon Helm's nephew on drums, and Ron Off on bass, playing with him. And during those years, as the Cate Brothers toured nationally and internationally with bands like Queen, Fleetwood Mac, and Heart, their fan base was growing as well. And it wasn't just their fans, like you and me, that were growing in numbers, but among their peers also. For instance, when they were on tour with Queen.
Brian May used to stand over to the side of the stage when we were playing. He liked us.
And people always, I mean, credible people in the industry always thought they were one of the best kept secrets in the industry, and respected by everybody. You know, of course, Bonnie Raitt and Huey Lewis, Carlos Santana, you name it. We're always, and some of them sneak in and watch their shows and stuff. Didn't want to bring the attention to them. They just come in and watch some of their shows.
Enter Randy Stratton again. The music industry was changing. Again, constantly evolving. And though their music continued to inspire people across the nation and their shows continued to pack the house, the sound of the music industry was changing. And by 1982, the brothers no longer had a record deal to get new music out. So, enter Randy Stratton.
Over the years, as Randy had taken over his dad's empire, he had been rubbing shoulders with a lot of monsters. I don't mean scary creatures. I'm talking about big names in the industry, artists and major label people. People like David Geffen, founder of Geffen Records, and producer and artist Rob Fraboni, who's known for producing greats such as Eric Clapton, The Band, and Bob Dylan, to name a few. He also helped build and design Shangri-La Studios. That'll matter in just a minute. Eventually, Randy moved out to Malibu, California, and that's when he invited the Cate Brothers out there to have them record and try to get a new record deal. And in order to shop record labels, you need music, so they started recording demos. And during that time, the Malibu sessions were recorded. And where were they recorded? The 4-song EP was recorded at Shangri-La Studios in Malibu. Sound familiar? Shangri-La Studios has been one of the biggest recording studios for some of the biggest names in the industry. I'm not going to get into all of it now, but for this segment, for example, The Band and Bob Dylan recorded there. Anyway, Stratton brought them out there, recorded demos, and of course, the Malibu sessions. On that EP, the band's keyboardist, Garth Hudson, played keyboards and strings on 2 of the songs, and Bonnie Raitt played slide guitar on one of the songs.
Since I knew them and Rob Fraboni had gotten in the picture, and Bonnie Raitt was dating Rob Fraboni, and I just did some concerts back in this area in Fayetteville and Tulsa and stuff with Bonnie Raitt, and we got to thinking, well, it'd be nice to put something together, get some demos. Of course, Rob Fraboni was very familiar with the Cates through Levon. And so we got him out there one May, 82, and recorded those Malibu session songs, 4 or 5 of them, and Bonnie played on some stuff. Garth Hudson was right there.
Stratton said David Geffen of Geffen Records and Rupert Perry of Capitol/EMI Records were the 2 labels most interested. But like I said earlier, times were a-changing. The early 80s saw a rise in rock and metal with bands like Van Halen and Metallica. We also saw a big rise in pop artists like Madonna and Michael Jackson. The more laid-back, funky, and/or soulful music was fading to the back burner, especially if it had disco in it. The only time you were hearing those kinds of sounds was coming out of the rise of R&B and rap.
The Cate Brothers didn't sign a new record deal with Geffen on Capitol, nor did they release the Malibu sessions at that time, which, by the way, doesn't sound disco and I think was the end of their disco flair. But they did continue to play shows all over. In fact, Stratton took them out west for a while, where he said they packed the house constantly.
In the meantime, we had offers to play. I booked them back out on the West Coast for 2 or 3, 3 times we went out there and played a pretty extensive little tour of our own, opening for Huey Lewis and playing some of our own headline dates at some prestigious rooms there, the Coach House in San Juan Capistrano, and several places like that.
The Cate Brothers did eventually get to release new music, an album in 1983 called Crisp and Tasty, and according to the information on the album, they were on Accord Record Corporation. Look that album up. It's good. It wasn't until the mid-1990s that the Cate Brothers would release new music. In fact, 12 years after the release of Crisp and Tasty, the Cate Brothers released Radioland. That album featured blues guitarist Coco Montoya. In 1997, they released Struck a Vein, which Coco Montoya also played on, and in 1999 released Cate Brothers Band Live. Then, after a 5-year pause, released Play by the Rules in 2004. Those albums I just mentioned were all blues and rock, baby. And then in 2006, an album called In the Natural State came out by Jimmy Thackeray with the Cate Brothers. That album is all blues. Dirty and gritty. It rocks. So you may be asking, bro, what about the Malibu sessions? Don't worry, I got you. Randy Stratton released the Malibu sessions in 2014. That, just like the previous albums I just mentioned, can all be found online, brothers and sisters.
So where does that bring us? Well, that brings us to today. right here on the side of George's Majestic Lounge. Why George's? Well, you can consider the Cate Brothers sort of the house band at George's. I mean, they're only painted on the side of the building, a tribute of respect and honor to the Cate Brothers. And that's because the owner of this very important establishment that we're lucky to have, Mr. Brian Crown, understood the impact the brothers had on the music scene, not only nationally, but what they had and still have today, regionally and right here at home. How do I know? Just listen.
They're just authentic Fayetteville.
I've been listening to the late 60s and 70s. They played at my high school prom.
We would go to like the swinging door and stuff afterward, you know.
Sure, like after parties and stuff.
After parties all night long.
Right, yeah. Oh, awesome.
Hanging
at
the bar.
Yeah, nice.
Well, we have good friends that are here from Missouri. Used to be on the city council up in Columbia, Missouri. We used to change ordinances back and forth and adopt each other's best laws. And so Columbia and Fayetteville are better towns because of that. And he wanted to see the Cate Brothers, and we said, have we got a deal for you? So they happen to be here at this time, so that's why we're down here.
They've been around for years, and I have followed them since then. It's wonderful to see them still hanging in there because we're all still trying to hang in there. So that's wonderful. They're kind of a motivation and inspiration to all of us older folks.
I went to college at UCA back in the 70s.
Okay.
And
All right.
we'd come up here if they played in the bar.
Yeah.
And I saw them several times, but over the, then the band, they played with the band.
That's right, yeah.
I love those albums that they play. The
That's
band,
right.
And I listen to them a lot. And I've seen them several times now.
What is it about the Cate Brothers?
Well, it's historic for one thing. The Cates have been around for a long time producing excellent music, and they're famous around here. So when they play in Fayetteville, it's an opportunity that no one should miss.
It's interesting, like even now, it's like we've been playing there so long, you know, even now you see people out in the audience when you play that was here 30 years ago.
What's that like?
It feels good, but it's strange, you know.
Yeah, the happy hour deal.
And the happy hour I'm talking about, you know. You see them the same people, you know, a lot of the same people.
When I asked the brothers what it's like to be mentors and so influential to other younger artists, for instance, like Isaiah Warford.
I mean, I wouldn't be the same without him. Not even the same.
And they humbly answered,
Well, I don't think about being an influence. I'm glad that they do like it, you know. And I'm trying to encourage them every chance I get. Stay with it.
Musicians, you know, different bands, most of the time, like the Nace Brothers, for instance, great friends, you know, we always feed off of each other, you know. But it's just kind of what's about being a musician, you know. You feed out, everybody knows what it's like to be a musician, so they have that thing in common. So.
You know, it's that commonality amongst musicians to create that makes that bond and produces the sounds that we love. And because of that long-lasting bond, you get years and years of great music to share with everyone to enjoy, just like the Cate Brothers did. Ladies and gentlemen, that'll do it for this segment. We'll see you guys soon. Remember, if there's an artist or artists that you think Joel and I should be covering, our contact information is right there on the screen. Until next time, y'all.
I can't